Those who read this letter will be the most successful people today. I will be the one to provide you with knowledge, experience, and wealth. Most importantly, from this point forward, I will help you memorize the lessons of success in the shortest time possible. Share me with your friends so that together, we can become elite and build lasting wealth. What would you think if I told you that the secret to unimaginable wealth has almost nothing to do with your intelligence, your education, or how hard you work, but is instead dictated by the silent, invisible shadows of your own ego and the hidden scars of your past? Imagine a world where a quiet, unassuming janitor named Ronald Reed, who spent his life sweeping floors and repairing cars, dies with a secret fortune of $8 million, while a high-flying Harvard-educated finance executive, drowning in luxury and prestige, collapses into a hollowed-out ruin of bankruptcy and despair. This is the staggering paradox that shatters our traditional understanding of economics. We are taught that money is a cold, hard science of spreadsheets and formulas, but the reality is far more visceral. It is a soft skill, a complex dance of human behavior where your temperament is the lead partner. The narrative begins by stripping away the illusion of the rational investor, revealing that none of us are actually making decisions based on math. Instead, we are all making choices based on the unique stories we tell ourselves about how the world works. Stories forged in the fires of the specific era into which we were born and the specific hardships we have endured. The story follows the tragic trajectory of those who had enough but risked everything because they were blinded by the mirage of more. We see the fall of men like Rajat Gupta, who rose from an orphan in India to the very pinnacle of global finance, only to throw away $100 million legacy for a fleeting tip on a stock trade. The analysis of this ruinous hunger reveals the most difficult financial skill of all, getting the goalpost to stop moving. In a world of social comparison, the ceiling of one man's success becomes the floor of another's insecurity. When we tie our self-worth to a relative number, we enter a race that has no finish line and no winners. The lesson learned is that enough is not a lack of ambition, it is the realization that an insatiable appetite for the unnecessary will eventually lead you to lose what is vital. We must recognize that the most valuable asset in any financial plan is the ability to sleep at night. A peace that cannot be bought with the currency of envy. The narrative then pivots to the most powerful, yet most deceptive force in the universe, compounding. The story of Warren Buffett is often told as a tale of a genius stock picker, but the true protagonist is time. Of Buffett's astronomical net worth, over 90% was accumulated after his 65th birthday. Had he started 10 years later or retired 20 years earlier, he would be a footnote in history rather than a titan. This is the Ice Age effect, where a tiny, almost imperceptible change in temperature, if sustained for thousands of years, can cover entire continents in ice. Wealth is not built by swing for the fences returns that happen once, it is built by unremarkable returns that are kept for a remarkably long time. The analysis here is a direct assault on our modern obsession with the hustle and the quick win. The lesson is that the most important variable in the wealth equation is not the rate of return, but the length of the runway. Being unkillable in the market, staying invested through every crash, war, and pandemic, is the only way to let the math of the universe do the heavy lifting for you. It is a testament to the fact that persistence is more valuable than brilliance. As the storytelling deepens, it explores the haunting role of luck and risk, two forces that are so similar they are often indistinguishable. We see a young Bill Gates attending one of the only high schools in the entire world with a computer in 1968, a 1 in a million stroke of luck that provided the fertile soil for Microsoft to grow. But the narrative also reminds us of Kent Evans, Gates's brilliant childhood friend, who shared the same genius and the same ambition but died in a mountaineering accident before graduation, a 1 in a million stroke of risk. Both were equally talented, yet their outcomes were dictated by the roll of the cosmic dice. The analysis of these lives forces us to confront a terrifying truth: the world is too complex for 100% of your actions to dictate 100% of your results. This realization is a call for radical humility. When you succeed, you must realize it is never as good as it looks. And when you fail, it is never as bad as it looks. The lesson is to focus less on specific individuals and more on broad patterns. Don't try to replicate the luck of a billionaire, but rather aim to avoid the systematic risks that lead to total ruin. The story intensifies as it explores the ultimate dividend that money pays, the ability to control your time. The narrative describes a generation that is money-rich but time-poor, trapped in high-paying careers that leave them exhausted and alienated. We use money to buy status symbols, cars, watches, and homes, thinking they will buy us respect. But the paradox of the man in the car reveals that no one is looking at the driver, they are only imagining themselves in the seat. True respect comes from kindness and humility. Yet we spend our lives chasing the hollow admiration of strangers. The highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up and say, I can do whatever I want today. The analysis here suggests that the greatest financial plan is one that maximizes for autonomy rather than returns. Money's greatest value is its ability to give you options and to protect you from the forced moves of life. It is the buffer between you and the whims of an employer or the volatility of an economy. The narrative continues into the shadows of the hidden costs of investing. We see the market not as a machine, but as a theater of human emotion, where the price of admission is not paid in dollars, but in volatility, fear, doubt, and uncertainty. Most people view a market drop as a fine for doing something wrong, but the storytelling reframes it as a fee for a service, the service of future returns. The analysis teaches us that if you want a great reward, you must be willing to pay the price of feeling like an idiot for a while. You must accept that the rational thing to do is often not the reasonable thing to do. A person who holds a large amount of cash might be irrational on a spreadsheet because they are losing to inflation. But if that cash prevents them from panicking and selling their stocks during a crash, it is the most reasonable decision they ever made. The lesson is to build a plan that is error-proof rather than optimal, acknowledging that your future self will be more emotional and less courageous than your current self predicts. As the story flows toward the complexity of the tail event, the narrative reveals that the vast majority of success is driven by a tiny percentage of events. In the same way that a few masterpiece paintings provide the majority of an art dealer's profits, a few outlier investments or a few months of staying calm during a crisis provide the majority of an investor's lifetime returns. Most of the time, you will be doing nothing, or you will be wrong, and that is perfectly okay. The storytelling captures the psychological weight of the long tail, where the struggle of 1,000 days is justified by the triumph of a single hour. This forces a re-evaluation of failure. If the tail drives everything, then failing most of the time is a natural part of the process. The analysis suggests that the goal is not to be perfect, but to be mostly okay for a very long time so that you are still standing when the tail event arrives. The narrative now shifts toward the changing self. The quiet tragedy of the man who spends his whole life working for a goal that his older self no longer wants. We see the 20-year-old who dreams of a high-pressure career in the city and the 40-year-old who just wants to see his children grow up. The end of history illusion makes us believe that who we are today is who we will be forever. But the story of our lives is one of constant evolution. This makes long-term financial planning incredibly difficult. The lesson learned is to avoid the extremes of financial planning. Don't live like a monk today for a future that might never come. But don't blow everything today and leave your future self in poverty. Aim for a middle ground that allows for flexibility, acknowledging that the one thing you can be certain of is that your desires will change. The psychological intensity of the script builds as we realize that money is not just about math, it is about the story of our lives, the legacy of our families, and the fragile peace of our own minds. We are moving toward the final synthesis, where the cold numbers of the bank account meet the warm blood of human experience, leading to the ultimate question of what it means to be truly wealthy in a world designed to keep us feeling poor. The tension remains as the narrative prepares to explore the seduction of pessimism and the final battle between our instinct for survival and our hope for growth. The characters of Ronald Reed and Richard Fuscon are not just men, they are two paths standing before every listener, demanding a choice between the ego of the moment and the freedom of the future. The storytelling will now bridge the gap between these two worlds, revealing the final, weighted truths of the human heart in the marketplace. The narrative descends deeper into the psychological cavern of our financial lives, uncovering the seduction of pessimism that haunts the modern investor. Imagine a room full of the world's most brilliant minds, where the man who predicts a coming apocalypse is lauded as a visionary, while the one who speaks of steady, long-term growth is dismissed as a naive dreamer. Pessimism sounds smarter, it sounds like it's protecting you, while optimism sounds like a sales pitch. The story follows the history of the 20th century, a century defined by 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless recessions, yet a century that saw the standard of living for the average human rise by more than 10 times. We are biologically wired to pay more attention to the tiger in the bushes than to the fruit on the tree. And in the world of money, this survival instinct turns into a self-sabotaging trap. The storytelling captures the speed of destruction versus the slowness of growth. A market crash can happen in a single afternoon, wiping out years of gains. But growth is a quiet, incremental process that requires the patience of a gardener. The analysis reveals a profound lesson: progress happens too slowly to notice, but setbacks happen too fast to ignore. Because of this, we are constantly tempted to abandon our long-term plans at the first sign of trouble, forgetting that the most important growth is often invisible until it is complete. The story then shifts to the illusion of control and the room for error. We meet the characters who believe they can predict the future because they have a fancy degree or a complex algorithm. But the narrative reminds us of the black swan events, the 9/11 attacks, the 2008 housing collapse, the 2020 pandemic, events that no one predicted and that changed everything. The most important part of any plan is having a plan for when the plan isn't going according to plan. This is the concept of the margin of safety. It is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of wisdom. The analysis suggests that the goal of investing is not to be right all the time, but to avoid being so wrong that you are forced to quit. We see the tragedy of the investor who is right about the long term but gets wiped out in the short term because they used too much leverage or had too little cash. The lesson learned is that you must be financially unbreakable to benefit from the compounding of time. You need a gap between what you think will happen and what can happen so that you can survive the unpredictable. The storytelling intensifies as it explores the social architecture of money, the invisible pressure to keep up with the Joneses. We see the neighbors of the high-flying executive feeling a sense of inadequacy, unaware that the executive is one paycheck away from ruin. The narrative exposes the hidden wealth of the quiet savers. Wealth is what you don't see, it's the cars not purchased, the diamonds not bought, and the renovations not made. It is the option to walk away from a toxic job or to stay home with a sick child. The analysis of this invisibility of wealth is a radical redefinition of success. We are taught to look for outward signs of riches, but true wealth is the absence of the need to show off. The lesson is that spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. It is a battle against the ego, a realization that your self-worth should never be tied to a depreciating asset. As the narrative flows toward the rational versus reasonable debate, it touches on the deeply personal nature of financial decisions. The story follows a young couple deciding whether to pay off their mortgage early. On a spreadsheet, it's a bad decision because the interest rate is low and they could earn more in the stock market. But in the reality of their living room, the feeling of owning their home free and clear gives them a sense of security that no stock portfolio could match. The analysis here is a liberation from the tyranny of the math. You don't need to be cold and rational, you just need to be reasonable enough to stay the course. If a suboptimal decision helps you sleep better and prevents you from panicking during a downturn, then it is, in fact, the most optimal decision for you. The storytelling honors the humanity of finance, acknowledging that we are not robots and that our emotions are a feature, not a bug. If we learn how to manage them, the story moves into the changing goals of the human life cycle. We see the man who spent 20 years saving for a retirement he now fears, and the woman who worked 70 hours a week to give her children a life they now resent because she was never there. The end of history illusion is the belief that our current values are permanent, but the narrative shows that we are strangers to our future selves. This creates a planning paradox. How do you plan for a person you haven't met yet? The analysis suggests that the best way to handle this is to avoid the extremes of life. Don't work so hard that you have no life today. But don't spend so much today that you have no future. Moderation is the ultimate strategy for a changing self. The lesson learned is to build a life that allows for pivots. Acknowledging that the person you are at 20 will want something different at 40. And different again at 60, as we reach the penultimate stage of the script. The narrative explores the conflicting goals of different investors. We see the day trader and the retirement saver looking at the same stock price but seeing two completely different things. The tragedy occurs when the long-term saver starts taking cues from the short-term gambler. The storytelling warns against the social contagion of investment bubbles, where the fear of missing out, FOMO, overrides the fear of losing everything. The analysis reveals that you must know what game you are playing and refuse to be influenced by people playing a different game. If you are a long-term investor, the daily fluctuations of the market are noise, not news. The lesson is to stay in your lane and protect your financial identity from the chaos of the crowd. The psychological intensity peaks as we confront the freedom of wealth. Money's greatest gift is not the stuff it can buy, but the time it can save. The story describes the modern slavery of being tied to a high-burn lifestyle that requires constant income. We see the liberation of those who choose a low-burn life, discovering that enough is a superpower. The analysis of this time-money trade-off is the climax of the book's philosophy. It is the realization that you can always earn more money, but you can never earn more time. The narrative prepares the listener for the final synthesis, where the stories of Ronald Read and the Harvard executive converge into a single, unified vision of a life well lived. We are standing at the threshold of the final realization that the psychology of money is, in the end, the psychology of a happy life. The tension remains as we prepare to hear the final, weighted truths that Morgan Housel leaves as his legacy to the reader. The final movement of this narrative odyssey brings us to the ultimate synthesis of the bank account and the human soul, where the cold, hard numbers of the marketplace finally meet the warm, fragile reality of the human heart. The story concludes by returning to the two paths we met at the beginning, the quiet, steady climb of Ronald Read and the explosive, tragic fall of the high-flying executive. We see that the difference between them was never about their ability to pick stocks or understand the intricacies of the bond market, it was about their ability to manage the person in the mirror. The storytelling captures the invisible finish line that the executive could never see, always pushing for one more million, one more house, one more ego stroke, until the ground gave way beneath him. In contrast, we see the visible freedom of the janitor, who used his money to buy the one thing that truly matters, the right to be left alone, the right to choose his own pace, and the right to die with the dignity of having more than he ever needed. The analysis of this final contrast reveals the core meaning of the book. Success in money is not a function of how much you make, but of how you behave in the face of uncertainty, luck, and your own desires. The narrative shifts to a final meditation on the personal nature of finance. Housel reminds us that no one is crazy. The person who buys lottery tickets in a low-income neighborhood is not stupid, they are buying a dream of a future that the world has told them they can never have. The person who hoards cash during a bull market is not cowardly, they are protecting themselves against a trauma they haven't yet forgotten. We are all playing our own games, based on our own rules. And the highest form of financial wisdom is to stop judging others and start understanding ourselves. The storytelling moves toward a quiet, powerful end, where we see the author's own financial plan, a plan that is not designed to beat the market, but to maximize for independence. He reveals that he and his wife have paid off their house early and keep a high percentage of cash, not because it's the most rational mathematical move, but because it gives them the reasonable peace of mind that allows them to live without fear. The analysis of this final revelation is the climax of the script. It teaches us that the goal of money is not to have the most, but to have enough to ensure that you never have to do anything you don't want to do. The story of the psychology of money is a journey from the external world of status to the internal world of contentment. It is a reminder that the most important thing money can buy is a margin of safety for your soul. As the narrative fades into the final silence, we are left with the image of a life that is no longer dictated by the flickering green lights of a ticker tape, but by the steady, warm glow of a home that is truly ours and a time that is truly our own. The core message and meaning Morgan Housel intends to convey is that your relationship with money is a mirror of your relationship with yourself. And true wealth is the ability to walk away from the race entirely. He teaches us that while the math of money is simple, the psychology of money is a lifelong battle against our own instincts for greed, fear, and ego. The book is a manifesto for the quiet wealthy, those who realize that the highest return on investment is the freedom to control their own time. It reveals that the ultimate secret to growing rich and staying rich is a combination of radical humility, extreme patience, and the courage to stop moving the goalposts. True wealth is the gap between your ego and your income. And the only way to win the game of money is to stay in it long enough for the world to work in your favor.